I'm going to call this monthly meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. This is our May meeting, and we will begin, as we begin all meetings, by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under our rules, the next part of our meetings are public testimony. Under the emergency order that has allowed these remote meetings, our policy has been to take public comment that is submitted via email to info@lawrenceallianceforeducation.org. And as long as it is received by noon on the day of the meeting, we read it into the record, and then individual copies are sent to each board member. We did not receive any public comment for this meeting, but I will just repeat that for those watching. If you wish to submit public comment, you can email info@lawrenceallianceforeducation.org by noon on the day of a meeting, and we will read that into the record, and individual copies will be, copies will be provided to each member individually as well. So with that said, I will move to new business, and at this time ask the superintendent and the mayor to provide updates on school closure and all related issues and all issues related to COVID-19 and the response in Lawrence. Superintendent and Mayor.
Great, thank you so much. I'll get us started and have Mayor Rivera jump in right after me. So we are working on summer school planning. You should know that we're going to start summer school remotely as soon as we are done with our school year, which is June the 22nd. So summer school will start remotely on June 29th. We believe that this is the right strategy for us as we continue with the momentum. It allows us to capture more students, and it allows us to differentiate per schools. Hotspots continue to be addressed in terms of accessibility, connectivity for our students. We've deployed them to the high schools, and now we're prioritizing other families. As I had mentioned in our last meeting, with the generous support of our mayor, we were able to acquire a contract of about 24.
Is everybody having issues with audio, or is it just me?
I'm fine.
I can hear.
I'm fine as well, yep.
I'm fine too.
We continue to think about other ways to get hotspots, but at the moment we're going to prioritize. We're looking into also thinking about the challenge that we have, which is we have families with up to, the largest family group that we have is 6 students sharing one device. So we have identified additional devices, and we're going to be working our way down the list for those families who have multiple students. And then we're going to work with our school teams to do some staggering of the schedules so that those devices can be shared among the siblings. Graduation planning is well underway. As I had mentioned, we're going to host a virtual graduation on June the 5th with school student government as leaders designing the virtual celebration. There's a survey out that went in terms of what students would like, with many, many details of that, and also in-person ceremonies for a later date. We also have been working with teachers, administrators, and families on our retention policy, I should say promotion policy. and have come to a consensus that during this closure, no student will be retained. So that has been a courageous move on behalf of parents, on behalf of administrators and teachers. We agree that the trauma and crisis that our students are under is called for a pause in our promotion policy. Lastly, we are going to be applying to the CARES Act funding. That is federal funding that we're eligible for. Our eligibility is about $6 million, and we will be applying for that later this summer. I'll take questions, reactions, comments.
I will just move, I'll do what we've been doing. I'll move in alphabetical order and then go in reverse order on the next round of questions. Jess Anders, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions right now.
Great, thanks, Jess. Noemi Custodia-Laura, any questions?
My only question is, I know at the last meeting we talked about the fact that, you know, by now all the students, I don't remember if it was by now or not, but we talked about like making sure that all the students will have access to the internet, and there were some talks about the hotspots and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been resolved?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We continue to be challenged by that. The biggest challenge, Noemi, is that we don't have inventory that is accessible. So the first 500 hotspots were in possession, and as we agreed, those are going to go to our high schoolers. We want them to finish well as the end year ends. And so as soon as our provider that we have negotiated a deal with is able to give us the rest of the units, then we will make those accessible to our families. But we just simply don't have the inventory.
Sure. And so then for the classes that are going to start this summer,
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if the majority of the kids will have access to the internet, or is that part of the inventory that you mentioned that you're trying to figure out?
That's what we're hoping for, that by the time we continue, as we keep this momentum of remote learning, that those students who are still not connected will have access during the summer so we can do our best support and interventions this summer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Patricia Mariano?
Yeah, Noemi asked the same question about summer school and access that I had. Can you speak a little bit about the CARES Act and that funding? And where that money will go?
Sure. So the CARE Act, as you know, is federal funding that is being, and I think Mayor Rivera might have more information on this, but basically they're for COVID-related, closure-related expenses. And we will get the details and guidelines as to what that covers, but the gist of it is for COVID-related or closure-related expenses.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Rivera? I think you're on mute, Mayor. You're on mute, Mayor.
There you go. Am I sharing my screen?
Yep.
So I just want to start off with the numbers. As of last night, we had 2,300 residents who were confirmed positive of COVID-19. 98 residents had died of it. This continues to ravage some of the most the elderly in our community, but it's still something that is widespread in our city. We are 5th per capita in the Commonwealth with total number of people infected, and 6th in total number. So we're 5th per capita and 6th in total number. Want to also show you, we did come out this week, this past week, actually we're in week 2 of it, about using masks in public places. It's now not an ordinance, but is an executive order between myself and the Board of Health. This has been seen as, you know, almost, you can stop the spread almost half as much with this than you can with staying home. And so we want to make sure everybody using masks, and they know that it's not just surgical masks that you see here, it's also, bufandas, which are scarves, and makeshift ones you can make out of different things. The idea is to cover your nose and mouth. And we have this flyer made. We're going to get it out to everybody in English and in Spanish. Very, very, very important part of what we're doing. Another piece of it is that we're going to be working to get, currently in Lawrence, we're only testing about a little less than 200 people a day. And we want to get to a place where we're testing 1,000 people per day. We're working on that. And that may take a capital infusion from the city, about $1 million to get to 1,000 people per day. But testing is the most efficacious way of getting to who has it, who doesn't. And so you can quarantine those people who have it, and everybody else can kind of go about their business and still have 6 feet distancing, masks, and hygiene. And if you do all those things, it'll slow the spread, and we can get a little bit back to some level of normalcy. But we may have to spend $1 million to get there for us. As you know, I'm on the governor's reopening committee, and we are, he came out with some guidance this week, and it was around the phases that we will be seeing coming up, and these are them. It's going to be, the start phase, which will be some loosening of what's going on right now, and then a cautious phase, a little bit more loosening, vigilant, where we get a little bit more, and then the very end will be the new normal. I think the important thing to take away from this slide is that not only are we talking about opening, but this is the most important part for me, that if anything happens, that the public health numbers go in the wrong direction, as they did, by the way, in Worcester yesterday. Worcester had a spike in cases and a spike in deaths that no one has really figured out yet. And so, we're into this, and in August, it all comes kind of coming back. We're going to be going back in the same way. The other thing is that there is going to be an announcement on the 18th about what it can be open. General social guidance is what we gave out on Monday, but on the 18th, it'll be like what sectors can open up. But what everyone can expect to do is that there's going to have to be guidelines. There's going to be standards around social distancing. It's going to be standards around hygiene protocols, standards around staffing and operations, and cleaning and disinfecting. Everybody will have to abide by this, no matter what industry you're in, public or private. And then every single industry is going to have a level. The governor came out with this slide on Monday, and the expectation is that, this is the basis really for on Monday, next Monday, what we'll hear is which industries will actually have to do it. The last thing I'll say is these are very uncertain times, and so budgeting is going to be a wild ride. I'm budgeting as if, we aren't going to get much support from the state, and that goes for the school department, with one exception, in that, I think that the legislature and the governor are going to do all they can to keep Chapter 70 level, and to keep unrestricted local aid level. I do not expect SOA money to come. So the budget that I will be presenting to the city council will not contain the SOA money. And if by some miracle and some help from the federal government, the SOA money comes, we'll just submit a supplemental budget to that effect. I do think, and I haven't really talked with the superintendent this much, but the expectation is, depending on what we get back in revenues, that people should be preparing budgets to have 10% cuts in it if they can't leave it level at the Chapter 70 level. But my sense is that they will. I think that when they go through this thing, triage the state budget, they're going to say budget is not just a numbers game. It's about our values, and they're going to keep education whole, which means for us it'll be flat at the very least. But I will submit my budget to the city council on the 15th, as per law. And but I think there are rocky times ahead, and but we're prepared. Thank God we have a nice nest egg in our reserves, and everybody's kind of been getting ready for this that's coming up. So that's my report. If I have any questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Ventura Rodriguez, questions for the mayor or the superintendent?
Appreciate both of you. I mean, it's a lot of information. I really appreciate everything you all are doing. I guess first, just Mayor, just want to make sure I understood. So you're submitting a budget on the 15th, and you said you're not going to put SOA dollars in there, correct? Okay, so just want to, yeah, I mean, again, this is all so uncertain right now, as the mayor said, and I think one thing I think about is just, you know, with the CARES Act funding, which obviously is not going to make up anything related to like the number we're expecting. And again, I'm not speaking as if it's a fait accompli, you know, that we're not going to get the SOA dollars, but just sort of thinking about just in case, you know, this is that the CARES Act funding is fairly flexible just in regards to what can be, you know, what it can be spent on in terms of supporting, as the superintendent said, technology, anything to do with the COVID response, but also things like mental health services and things, you know, that I know built up a lot of the SOA budget in terms of staffing to support the social emotional health of our students. So I think it's not much a question, but just a comment that as this is playing out, and we're waiting to hear from the state in terms of like SOA funding and so forth, just making sure that, you know, we're all staying very closely connected in terms of communicating around that information and thinking about whatever resources we do have, like, you know, in this case, some resources around CARES Act funding, like what could be preserved. I mean, in terms of the plan that the superintendent has shared, you know, widely, and you know, I think is really resonating in terms of the support that our students need. So it's not really a question. It's just, yeah, kind of taking it all in and you know, trying to make sure that we're with whatever resources we have, trying to prioritize those components of the plan that I think are really speaking to the needs of our kids, and especially I think of mental health. And I mean, there's so much in that plan, but just being ready to support our kids.
Yeah, no, and I think that the part of this that's important is that that if there's going to be money that's more than the Chapter 70 allocation, that we could, in a hurry, in an emergency meeting, have a meeting with the city council and appropriate it towards that end. I think, again, we have the governor's budget that's out there. That's the only budget that's out there. They stopped it in first time, and I think probably ever, the governor has withdrawn that budget and will be submitting a new budget. So even basing it on the governor's budget is basically a hope. But I got to base it on something. And then again, if I see what's happening in the landscape, and that is we have a rainy day fund here, we have a national rainy day fund. They haven't done any support to the federal or from the federal government to states and localities, and I think that's coming. And so I think that and then when they make those hard choices at the State House, you know, a group of people that just voted to give $20 million extra to Lawrence, I think it'll be hard pressed for them to not prioritize level funding Chapter 70. If they do that, then we got to come back again, because now I got to cut from the Chapter 70 number. So I'm already in hope territory. And so I don't want to hope on hope. That is a bridge too far. And frankly, to submit it to the council that way, the council would have questions on it. It would be a fantasy. And I think, frankly, it's not good stewardship. And again, we got extra money last year. We wanted to put it down before the council, and we got it appropriated, and it got put in the right place. So my expectation is that if they can do beyond what's level funding for, you know, for Chapter 70, then it would be the way that the plan is set up for the SOA money. It's the cold, hard place that I find myself in to be able to submit. Now I can submit a 112 budget, but I think that would put more uncertainty into the atmosphere than not, because we could get to August when the state does their budget and it gets done, and we might find out we're whole with Chapter 70, and then we're off to the races. Yeah, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's just sinking in. And all I would say is to the degree that, you know, we as a board can be helpful as information becomes known in working through the scenarios and helping, you know, the school department just think through again, like just how you all prioritize the supports that we need for our kids. Like, happy to be a part of any meeting or whatever we need to do to just think through, you know, how we can, as information becomes known, how we can respond.
And if we get less than base funding that we have in the budget, then we'll all have to come together and figure that out with the leadership of the superintendent. And if we, just the same way, if we get more, we're gonna have to, the superintendent will lead us in that.
Thank you. Julio Silverio, any comments or questions?
Just a comment. First of all, I missed all of the conversations with the superintendent. For some reason, I was not able to, I didn't have audio. So maybe sometime after, I'll reach out to someone to fill me in on what was said at the beginning of the meeting. And the one thing that I want to point out is am I correct to think that the budget that we were presented with did not include the SOA money? Was that that was my understanding, that I mean, we knew that because we still had to work on that it did not take into account, it was not part of the amount that was budgeted?
So in part, we waited to do the exercise of SOA separately because of the draft plan that it requires. And so I'll let Maciel jump in here to clarify what was actually presented, excluding SOA.
Sure. So part of the SOA money we received, DESI allowed us to allocate about $5 million to reoccurring contractual obligations. So that part of it was included because that's how we were able to handle our own contractual obligations. But that's all that was included for SOA. Everything else was on a separate plan. Does that help, I hope?
Yes, it does. So it seems like that that is the only amount that we should at this point be concerned with.
Correct.
The 5 million.
Correct, and I will have to adjust considering what the mayor just said.
Exactly, and then on top of that, we need to look at the additional 10% that was discussed at the last meeting to cut across the board.
Right, which is something that, as I explained during the budget hearings, and I'll also give an update later on, we're definitely prepared to complete that exercise with our schools and their teams, and we'll take care of that as soon as we have an actual number to work with, because it's an extremely intense process that we can't just practice until we have an actual number.
That's understandable. Thank you.
So there was a page 6 in the school budget document that had a $21 million number. And that's the number that we're taking out of the whole thing. And so I know that you and Mark have to have I don't know if you had already, conversation, make sure that you guys are on the same page. I don't want to underfund it. I just can't fund
Yep.
the other stuff. Okay.
No, I completely understand. Mark and I touched base very for a short period today.
Good.
We have to have follow-up conversations. He did mention to me, he was asking me questions about the SOA number, and now I kind of connected those two things with what you just said, Mayor. So I will definitely work on making sure that we adjust down the $5 million that we put in for the contractual obligations that were increased, and we'll work with the team to make sure we take care of that.
Again, I don't want to pretend. I don't want to sit. I don't misunderstand. If there are $5 million worth of new contractual obligations that don't involve new FTEs, then
No.
Okay.
There were no new FTEs in the budget that was presented.
Okay.
All the new FTEs would have been part of the SOA funding.
Gotcha. All right. You and Mark will figure it out. We'll make sure you're whole to do the operations level fund from last year. And then if we get more, we'll come back and do this SOA fund.
Absolutely.
The other part of the question is, I'm gonna deviate from the budget at this point, and I don't know whether the superintendent addressed it or not, or whether it's another item on the agenda. Have we decided on anything that we will be doing for the seniors?
Absolutely. So right now we have decided that the graduation will be on June the 5th, and that continues to be a virtual graduation. You should know that there are 30 seniors working furiously right now to design what that looks like, to also include additional celebrations throughout that week, and then the possibility of something face-to-face later in the winter.
Okay. And has the staff been in touch with the seniors at all, or has
Yes.
anything special been done for them?
Yeah, I'm going to have Maricel jump in. She's been intimately working with the staff and the seniors. So Maricel, if you can jump in.
Sure, no problem. Hi. So just an update on where the seniors are at. The seniors have been meeting with senior advisors and LHS leadership to devise a questionnaire, a survey. They went out to all the seniors to ask them their input for what it is that they wanted to see in the virtual graduation and also in-person ceremony, as well as some ideas that they had about the city honoring them on that week of their graduation. And so the mayor has been very helpful with those asks, and we've gotten a great feedback from the surveys. Now our next step is to engage with the students, the seniors' parents, who would then also provide their feedback and start with planning for activities that will start the end of the month and hopefully through December.
Thank you, Maricel. Thank you, Superintendent. I think it's a time, you know, as we've seen, that where we need to pay a lot of attention to make sure that these kids feel important and that they feel that they're special, especially during this transition, because it's so different.
We couldn't agree more with you, Julia. You're cutting out a little bit, but we couldn't agree more with you. We feel the same way. We're feeling the loss. This is a point of pride for us when we graduate our seniors, our students. It is a moment of extreme pride for us, and it's a loss for the entire community. Rest assured, they're doing an excellent job of thinking very creatively about how to make this special to them given the circumstances.
All right, thank you. Jess, Noemi, and Pat, I know I asked you on questions before the mayor spoke, but rather than circle back to see if you have others, because I'm just going to note that we have a budget discussion 2 items away on the agenda. So if you do have questions relative to that and can hold them till then, that would be great. And what I'm going to do right now is turn it over to the superintendent for her report, which begins with an update on Community Day and RISE, and then we'll move to the budget discussion. Superintendent?
Great, thank you so much. I'll just have a slight change in the order of business here. We'll move on to an update for RISE, CDA, the district calendar, the code of conduct, followed by the budget presentation. So just a reminder that we have partnerships with RISE. We have a partnership that supports our program RISE, and that is ending this year. To note is that we're going to be moving into a new space, and we're under negotiations right now. We expect to be finished with those negotiations and acquire the new space, a rental space, later this summer. So I will bring you a full update once we have secured that space. We also expect to bring more robust programming to RISE, and in the future expand the program to our middle school students who also need that additional support. We have excellent leadership there, and we have very good plans for RISE, and so we're very excited about that. In addition, the same partner is with us at the Lawrence Family Public Academy. As a reminder, that's our early childhood. It is our full day preschool and kindergarten classroom. We're also transitioning, same partner. The good news here is that we started that transition earlier this year to include more play-based programming and centers, and have successfully done that, including the adoption of our district-wide curriculum. When I have spoken to the teachers and administrators, they are quite happy with the transition we're now, and we've continued to get support from the charter from the charter group. Next, I'm going to ask Kenan to jump in. She'll give you an update on the CDA transition as well.
Sure, thank you. I think you all received this PDF with the materials last week. So just a summary of where we are with the transition planning for our partnership with the community group ending. So as you all know, the contract with the community group will be ending or expiring in June of this year. Arlington Middle School and CDA, Community Day Arlington leadership teams, have been working collaboratively all year to plan for this. We also engaged one of our great partners, Great Schools Partnership, to work with the school leadership team that is comprised of Arlington Middle School and Community Day Arlington administrators, teachers, and parents. That process, unfortunately, has been paused due to COVID and school closure. The leadership team and staff at both schools are still working to focus on the 3 priorities you see right there, and the stakeholder engagement that Great Schools Partnership was leading will continue once school reopens. And do you want to pause here, Superintendent, before we move to calendar?
Yes, please. We'll take any questions, comments, or remarks.
Okay.
I just have a quick question. Do you want us to just jump in, John, or you got?
I'm just going to work it in the order. Sorry, Mayor. Julia, questions on this?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
Great. Ventura Rodriguez?
None at this time, thanks.
Okay. Mayor, thanks for waiting.
No worries. This was a big part of the takeover and when we first did this partnership. Is there a plan for some analysis of the efficacy of the partnership, or lessons learned, things to do again, things not to do again? We basically did it for 8 years. So I want to, is there something that we can take away from this? Is that planned or not?
Yeah, I love the idea, and I think it would be a great exercise sort of to do some reflecting and analysis of both lessons learned, things that were successful, and then moving forward. We currently don't have that in the works. I am certainly happy to do some reflecting myself in my short tenure here, in addition to doing some interviewing with the staff, families, and kids, and of course looking at academic data to see how successful those efforts were.
I just think we sunk the money into it. The reflection is part of what we get out of it. I think would be very important to do. So if any way I can be helpful with that, let me know.
Thank you.
Not on the math. I don't know the data.
If I can say, Mayor, we did compile some data at the beginning of our work with Great Schools Partnership, specifically regarding Community Day's performance since the community group took it over, and I'd be happy to share that with you.
I mean, if there's a great win here and the partnership is any for other reasons than performance, I think we should actually, even if it is for performance, I think it'd be nice to share with the world that we did something good here, and what we did work to do.
Yeah, we're happy to come back and share sort of a bigger analysis for you all to sort of have concrete data in addition to sort of testimonials and reflection. We're happy to do that.
Patricia Mariano?
Yes, I was going to ask a similar question that the mayor asked as far as data, like what were the pros and cons of that program over at the Arlington? So thank you, Superintendent, for offering to share that with us.
Of course.
Noemi Custodio-Laura?
I don't have any questions right now. Thank you.
Great. Jess Anders?
I'm just wondering, I know that the community day, because I know that they operated it as a neighborhood school, but they kind of did it on their charter model, and they had a very different sort of approach to their teaching staff, and I guess, both who they recruited and how they structured and treated them. And so I'm wondering what's the, like, what's the continuity plan in terms of the teaching staff at the elementary level? Like, are we keeping mostly the teaching staff that Community Day had there? Are they being offered positions and like under the union contract with the full school, or are we evaluating their effectiveness, or like how is that all being handled?
Sure, I'm going to let Kenan jump in. And every single staff member, with the exception of one, it is an LPS staff member. So they will remain, the staffing, the FTE will remain. And the work that Kenan was sharing with you is part of like the rebranding and the restructuring to including the staffing model. So I'll let her jump in so that you can get some ideas of what they're thinking.
Yeah, just reinforcing the fact that all of their teachers have always been in the LTU, so that will continue. They are going to maintain a similar staffing model as this year, as they have this year. One thing that the leadership is doing is really looking with a critical lens at all of the roles at both schools and trying to optimize where they can better share resources. So for example, they are reassigning some elementary specific positions to be complex wide, specifically as it relates to family engagement, for example, to have a more cohesive experience K-8 for families. So there are some staffing changes, just like all of our other schools make some staffing changes every year during the school planning process.
Okay, and I guess a follow-on and related question is that, I mean, I've had the impression from some work that we did with them that Community Day was particularly strong around family engagement, and they were partly like they were bringing in TCG staff to help with family engagement at the school. I might not be characterizing that correctly. That was my impression, but so I guess if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the, like, what's the family engagement plan going to be across the whole complex now?
Yep, so specifically, so there was one position that was still reporting to the community group and not to LPS, or technically a part of LPS. That individual has chosen to stay with the community group, but we have given them the position, a vacancy position to backfill.
Okay.
So instead of that family engagement person being focused K-4, they would be a complex wide, and they're making a few other adjustments. I can share more specifics, like changing a parent liaison from 42 weeks to 52 weeks, and a few other adjustments like that to better support kind of a cohesive front office and parent-facing team across grade levels.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, or maybe it's more of a comment, you know, and again, anyone who has different or better information should correct me, but my impression is also that that neighborhood, the Arlington neighborhood, is more a center of Guatemalan immigration to the city, and that within like our Guatemalan residents, there's like a broader language diversity than maybe within our Puerto Rican or Dominican communities here. And do we have some language capacity to engage the parents who might not be fluent in Spanish because they speak an indigenous language? And I don't know how widespread is that. I don't necessarily have a sense of the depth or the widespread nature of that.
You're right. So there is an indigenous language in Guatemala. We don't have many families in our district who are part of that community, but of course we do have Central American students across the district. There are some clusters. We're sort of finding them also. My last group of lunchtime with students was at International High, and I had lunch with 4 girls from Guatemala. The conversation was around lunch. They were eating an open-face steak and cheese sandwich. I was asking them, do you know what this is? And they're like, no. I was like, I know. And, I said, sometimes kids put ketchup on it. So we were having a conversation, and they were missing tamales, and but they're actually spread out in our district. We do have some clusters, as I said, but we have not encountered native language. Kitzel is what I think it is. I'm not fluent in any of that, but I'm familiar with the actual village in terms of where it stands. It's northwest of we have not encountered those. They may exist, and they haven't quite come out because they're also bilingual, so they're using Spanish as the main language to communicate with us.
All right. Okay. Just checking. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Jess. I have one question. Will CDA retain its EMO status next year?
I'm sorry, can you clarify what you mean by EMO status?
Will it remain an EMO?
It will not. So this actually is the end of that EMO. And I think we had sort of shared that after the retirement of the executive director who got us on track, and she retired, we have a new executive director, and we agreed to stay on the 2-year contract as we transition. And this is our transition year.
And so will there be a new EMO to take its place?
They will not. So this is part of the rebranding and the sort of reimagining what the complex will look like in our work with Great Schools Partnership. And, we worked really closely and still are with the community group, and they felt like they had put us in a very good place that we can now, after 8 years, to the mayor's point, actually do what's needed to continue the progress and success of the school.
Okay. All right, next up on your report, Superintendent.
Sure thing. So next, we're going to talk about the district-wide calendar. As I had mentioned, Governor Baker has proposed September the 14th to be a holiday in the state that is moving the Marathon Day. It is currently in the legislature, but we want to get ahead of that. So I'm going to have Kinnan share with you the proposed change in the calendar, and we will be seeking a vote tonight on that proposal.
Thank you. So here's our calendar that has been approved. I've highlighted just the 2 changes as Cynthia mentioned. It's relatively straightforward. It would change September 14th to a non-school day for students and staff. And that would push back the last day of school, which has 5 days built in for snow days, from June 21st to June 22nd. So you can see the changes reflected here. Marathon Monday, no school. Instead of June 21st being the last day of school, it would be June 22nd. And obviously, if this does not get passed in the legislature, we would be looking to amend it back to how it was, but it's a pretty simple change.
Thank you, Kinnan. So we will take questions, comments, reactions to the proposal.
Got it. Thank you, Superintendent. Questions on the calendar? Jess Anders?
While we talk, can we have it just shown again? Thank
Jess,
you.
any questions?
I don't have questions on the calendar, no.
Okay, thanks. Noemi Custodialora, any questions on the calendar?
I don't have any questions.
Patricia Mariano, questions on the calendar?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Mayor Rivera, questions?
Same question I asked last year. We have any, because the first time we changed the calendar, we had friction with the EMOs. Do we have any issues this year?
No, we have no issues with it. We dealt with any changes and approved them during the school meeting process.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the calendar as presented by the superintendent.
Can I just run through the rest of the members just to make sure?
I'm sorry.
Yep, no problem. Ventura Rodriguez,
All
any
set,
questions?
thanks.
Okay, Julio Silverio, any questions?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
All right, Joseph Trinidad, I'm horrible. I totally missed you here on our first rounds. Any questions on the calendar?
No, sir.
Okay, apologies on missing you on the first two rounds there. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the amended calendar as presented at this meeting tonight.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion is on the floor, moved by Mayor Rivera, seconded by Member Rodriguez. Joan, can you call the roll just so we're abundantly clear in this remote meeting setting?
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
We will start with Mayor Rivera,
Take it
Yes.
easy, Mayor. Yep.
Yes.
Julia Severio,
Yes.
Jessica Andrews,
Yes.
Ventura Rodriguez,
Yes.
Patricia Mariano,
Yes.
Naomi Custodia Laura,
Yes.
and Chair Conley.
Yes.
7 yeses,
right.
unanimous.
The motion passes 7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Thank you, everybody. Superintendent, next up.
Thank you so much. So next we're going to discuss the students' right and code of conduct. On the call today, Denise will set this up and walk us through it. Just a reminder that our legal counsel, Angeles Magula, is also on the call and will be answering any questions as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Superintendent. I am going to share my screen here with all of you. And we are really excited to be able to introduce to you and debut the new Students' Rights and Code of Conduct Handbook, which will be effective for the coming school year 2021. We want to be able in this to really talk to you about, why are we even doing a new code book? First, I'd say that if any of you are familiar with the current or old code book, we could probably just be done presenting, right? It is a very difficult and cumbersome book to be used by families or students or schools. So more on that later. The big thing here is that this began with some work that the district was doing collaboratively with the Lawrence Teachers Union to continue to build on our welcoming and supportive climate for all of our students. So to that end, the collaboration launched a Culture and Climate Steering Committee, and we talked about that last time we were together, consisting of 28 educators, school leaders, and central office. That committee really decided that one of the biggest tools that we could use to expand on our welcoming and supportive climate would be the introduction of restorative practices to the district. When we looked at that holistically, we recognized that the current handbook is in many ways in conflict with the values of restorative practices, and therefore a subcommittee was put together to really look at the ways that we could improve our handbook. So let me go through some slides on what is different about our handbook. I believe you all had the opportunity to review the new handbook in some links that we sent in advance, but I'm going to go through just some of the major changes with you now. So first is simply being the approach. We've changed the approach to be far more holistic, beginning right with the title. You'll see that there's a new title around students' rights and the Code of Conduct Handbook, which just emphasizes that the document is more than just how we handle violations of our policies, it's also about highlighting the rights of our students alongside the expectations and the consequences for any violations of the policies as consistent with the federal or state regulations. The next change is the fact that it is far easier to read. It is 30 pages, which is a reduction from 46 pages. And even with the reduction, it now includes a new section on context. And that context really allows for us to help the reader understand what are restorative practices, what are the benefits of restorative practices, and our commitment to the implementation of those practices as a way of addressing both community building and consequences for when violations of policies do take place. So here's where we get to some of the meatier changes. The book really moves away from 18 complicated levels, and it organizes violations of policies and the related discipline into 3 main groups. So in the C code violations, we are talking about things that happen at the classroom level. So C stands for classroom, and the discipline is at the discretion of the educator. It's facilitated by the educator, and the consequences do not include suspension. And because they do not include suspension, they do not require the same type of due process. So these are things that happen in the classroom, and the educator can decide, is this something that, you know, maybe it's a letter of apology, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a detention. They have that type of jurisdiction and discretion in deciding. It should be noted, though, that we know that there are times when there are repeated and chronic or escalated occurrences of C code violations. And in those cases, an educator can elevate to the principal or designee for possible consideration of a D code violation, which of course takes us to D code violations. These are elevated to the school leader or designee. These are for actions that, you know, are stepped up a bit, if you will, from the classroom level violations. And the decisions about the type of response to the violations are at the discretion of the principal or his or her designee. Emphasizing here that suspensions, while they can be an option, they're truly reserved for issues of safety or as a last resort when a student is unresponsive to other types of remediation. And then finally, the third category, which are consequences for M code violations, and M stands for mandatory. These are facilitated also by the school leader or designee in accordance with Mass General laws. And again, you can take a glance at this either on the screen or in the handbook, where these are really the most serious or significant violations and come with them sometimes the most serious and significant responses to discipline. So if we continue on, I'll point out a few more differences along the way. These include, oh, before we do that, actually, this is a great visual. These are just some of the pages in the existing Code of Conduct book. So this is just some, this is a sample of some of those 18 levels. You can understand at a glance from this why this would be, even though it might have been accurate at the time, why it might have been really challenging for families and students and our educators and school leaders to use. You know, and that would result in confusion and chaos and accusations of not following the Code of Conduct. So, you know, we really had this wonderful opportunity to clean this up in a way that is superbly transparent, in my opinion, and super easy to use for folks. So we do believe the 3 new code structures are also, they're modeled after a few other communities who are already implementing restorative practices. And we think that they're really a tremendous leap in the right direction in terms of transparency and, engagement with our families. So a couple more things about what's different is also that this past year, our legal counsel really worked hard with our school leaders to train them on changes to due process, again, as they align with the Mass General laws. And that training happened, and there was a corresponding protocols or process document that went out to them. We're now able to fold all of that due process directly into the handbook. So that is also included here in a much easier to read process, we believe. And then I want to add that, you know, what's also different, even though manifestation determination process has always been included in the handbook, this is a much clearer, easier to read section on MDRs, and basically explains who's entitled to them, what are the steps that you take for conducting them, and then we also streamlined how we go about setting those up adjacent to an actual discipline hearing. So we're only asking families to come in once to address issues. And what happens in that case is that a manifestation determination review happens. And if we find that a violation is actually a manifestation of a student's disability, then we cancel the hearing and return the student to school. And if it's not a manifestation, then we can roll right into the hearing, and that is just much more convenient for families, right? We're not sending them to come to more than one place or come in more than one time. It's about, you know, maximizing our opportunity with the family and streamlining a process. So that's also included in the code book as well. Hold on, I've gotten frozen here. Give me 1 second to figure out what's wrong here. Okay, so basically what we want to be able to do with this book is really to make sure that the fundamental approach helps families understand that our commitment to restorative practice does not equal no consequences. And I think that's going to take us continued outreach and communication efforts, but also it's woven into the narrative of this book all throughout the book, that, you know, truly there are many alternative responses to discipline that can be more productive for learning, more conducive to building strong learning communities. And of course, suspension, while it is a legitimate disciplinary action for some consequences, it's really reserved for issues around imminent safety and chronic behavior that's not responded to those alternatives. And even as we do discuss that, we've been spending significant time, and the book addresses this, that we're really prioritizing where possible the opportunity to have in-school suspension where a student who may be suspended is in school, not in the classroom, but in school, so that they can still have some structure and some supervision to support their continued academic progress. I'm going to wrap up by just letting you folks know that, you know, when I talked to you about where we were, how we were leading up to the development of this handbook, we talked about all the steps in getting there. Wanted to let you know that we really had some wonderful opportunities to collect amazing feedback. I think I mentioned last time that the work group took this to the full steering committee of 27 members. They overwhelmingly approved it. We then last week met with school leaders who also overwhelmingly approved it, made 2 minor recommendations, which we incorporated into the codes. We also met with safety officers and got their feedback, which was very positive. We met with the student representatives of the student superintendent student cabinet just last week. And Pat Mariano joined us for this, but last week we met with the Two Voice Council, which is a collaboration of parents, students, educators, partners, school leaders, 76 people came to that Zoom meeting. And again, hugely overwhelmingly positive. Our legal counsel supported us throughout the entire process so that we felt very confident about aligning well with state and federal regulations. And then I'm just going to leave you with some quotes from some of our students and parents and other stakeholders, and close by saying that, you know, we have completed both the English and the Spanish translation of these documents. We're looking forward to getting them printed, communicating them widely, and following up on the additional feedback that came from both educators and parents, which is to begin to plan for some training sessions for all of our stakeholders on how we utilize this book. What are the changes? How do people utilize it? How do they understand the 3 codes? So we're very excited, and I am going to leave it at that and take your questions.
Thanks, Denise. Julia Silverio, any questions?
No, I think it's an excellent opportunity to have worked on this for Denise and the group, and I congratulate you. So I'm sure as you start implementing this, they will be questions, and there will be times when you might have to rethink and readjust certain things. But I'm happy, particularly to hear that the detention, the suspension is not the first item on this student handbook. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Appreciate it.
Ventura Rodriguez.
No, I echo those exact sentiments. I just think this is great work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Rivera.
You're mute. You're on mute.
I think about one of the questions the superintendent got when she was going through her interview about stopping the pipeline from detention to the prisons. And I think we have our answer here, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Patricia Mariano.
Yes, just a couple of questions. The book is very, very well done, and I want to thank you and the team for doing it. And like you said, the parents received it very well the other night, all 76 of them at your meeting. I was reading the book itself, and I believe one of the parents asked this question the other night. Will there be support for, I mean, when you're talking an in-school suspension, is that a position that the schools need to add to monitor an in-school suspension room? How are we going to provide for that?
Thank you for
Because
the,
go ahead.
yeah, thank you for the question. It's the same question that both educators and administrators will grapple with. And so there are already best practices in our district where in-school suspension happens. And so the next level of work here is to make sure that those groups help us rethink some of this. You should know that's happening already in the high school. It certainly happens at the middle school. So we're going to take those best practices from those 2 levels and see how we can support smaller schools where staffing or FTE is limited. But I think this is very doable, very doable. And they're on board with it, and they are really embracing these changes. So we're going to work with them.
All right, and one other question. The appeal process for a long-term out-of-school suspension, the appeal process goes to you, Superintendent. I know in the past we've had a hearings officer. Is this always going to be you, or will there be a designee attached to this? And maybe that should be included in the book next to your name.
Yeah, absolutely. At this moment, I will be tending to those. They're not that many. And so in my short tenure here, I've done 3 maybe. and it's a reasonable amount of time. I want to respect the process with the parents and the student and the educators. And so I'm happy to continue to do that.
Okay. All right, that's it for now. Thank you.
And I just in response to that as well, now that we have such a robust handbook, it will be reviewed annually. So every summer, you know, Denise and her team and I will get together and look at whatever revisions need to be made that are pursuant to the law, or tweaks that we need to make based on how it was implemented, where there's some wiggle room on that. So there's always the opportunity to revise and adjust as needed, and it'll be done on an annual basis.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Jessica Anders.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing, so I don't know if this is in here, but I'm just gonna air a little pet peeve of mine, which is that I hope either the handbook or any derivative action from it will emphasize that taking away children's recess should not be a first option of behavior management in classrooms. So I just want to note that for the record. I love this, and I think this is great work, and I am really happy about the shift in framing around all of this and the restorative justice approach and what it means. I am just going to play devil's advocate, because I think that I think that there's a lot of people in the district, students and teachers and families, who are very excited about this. And then there are some skeptics about it as well. And so maybe this is more a question for the superintendent, but I would like to hear a little bit more again about some of the training and education that we're doing around this, so that folks can understand the approach and not, I think that some of the skeptics default to thinking that, you know, this means that children aren't being disciplined at all and that there's no accountability for behavior. And I fully understand and believe that that is a misinterpretation of the, you know, both the aims and the methods of this, but it would be helpful to address that, I think.
Sure. So we do have a district-wide school culture and climate committee who will be putting forth not only trainings, but sort of broader communication and better understanding for the different stakeholder groups. Discipline will continue to happen. So that's part of the training and the outreach and sort of explaining to different stakeholder groups. We will still have discipline. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And how we arrive at discipline via sort of the law and then the core values is the match here, is what we're trying to marry. So we're still going to have things that happen that we feel are in violation of this book, and those will account for disciplinary actions. The rest of it is how we embody our core values. And this is what I think you're referring to, which can get a bit confusing, or the skeptics will raise, oh, they don't do any discipline over there, kids are running amok. Not true at all. That's not going to happen. The other thing that we heard from the educators, parents, teachers, is that they would like some training. So you're absolutely right. When we roll this out, we have to make that distinction very clear. I can let Angela jump in here, or Denise, to clarify sort of that nuance, but absolutely we will still have discipline, and we will still have the heart of restorative justice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the superintendent really phrased it really, really well. And I think that one of the issues and pushback that you'll see in implementing this new handbook is a pivotal change, which is that when you move to suspend someone out of school, they have to stay in school until the hearing is had. So there's and it's actually a hearing. There is a hearing process where there's a potential violation of the handbook, an investigation is done, a determination is made from the school's perspective that there has been a violation of the handbook, and then the due process rights of both the family and the student kick in to have a hearing to present that information, hear mitigation or response to that, and then make a determination about whether you're going to get suspended out of school. And there is potentially a gap in time between the offense, let's say, flipping a table in the classroom, and the consequence, the hearing, and then the subsequent consequence. And so in other districts, and a little bit this year when we were implementing this, you see some pushback with the teacher who says, why is that kid still in my classroom? And so some of this comes with, there's going to be a little bit of growing pains, but we've had some of those growing pains this year, actually, because we started implementing the law, and the superintendent and Denise and the principals really embraced that sort of on the ground change. And so you're right, there will be some skeptics. We've heard it already a little bit, but we've already sort of, from my perspective, when I've come in and done the trainings and principals call me to ask me questions, we've moved the ball forward with that, and there'll be a little bit more of that. But the superintendent is exactly right. It's like, yes, there will be discipline, but it will be done through the lens of restorative justice and consequences that are tied to the event, not missing school, which is a right, not a privilege. Thank you.
Joseph, Trinidad, questions?
The only comment that I have will be thank you for you and your team for doing such a great job, and I really think this new this new format and this new bill would really be beneficial for all the students and staff. So thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to, absolutely thank all the people who were on the subcommittee who worked on this. This is, you're seeing my face, but there were countless people who really contributed to this.
Great. Denise, do you need a vote?
No, this is just an update for you. We're just happy to debut it with you all.
All set. Great. Thank you for what was clearly a lot of thoughtful work, and thanks for the depth of the presentation tonight.
My pleasure.
Great. Superintendent, next up.
Sure. Next, I'll have Maciel present the budget.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and give you a walkthrough the summary of the budget. And then I will also give you an overview or summary of some of the questions asked by the subcommittee. And then I'll open it up for any additional questions that the committee might have.
Maciel, can I just preface one quickly here and turn over to you? So I just for all the members of the board, at this point, we've had 2 budget presentations through the course of this whole school year at the board level, and then 2 budget subcommittee hearings where we reviewed the budget at both a school by school and a department by department level. Tonight is meant for the whole board to get another look at the budget, for the members not on the subcommittee to ask questions. Members of the subcommittee welcome to ask questions as well, but to make sure that members who aren't on the subcommittee have a chance to ask questions. We're not going to vote on it tonight, given a few of these balls that we have in the air right now on the numbers and what we want that final presentation to be, but presumably and hopefully we will be voting on it very shortly. But I just wanted to make sure everybody is on the same page as to where we are at this point in the budget review process. The subcommittee has finished its review at this time. It's an opportunity for the whole board to kind of get a final look and final questions. All right, thanks, Maciel. Go ahead, and sorry to interrupt.
Sure, no problem. So the budget book opens with the superintendent's letter to the mayor. And then we move on to some information about the Student Opportunity Act, which pretty much gives you a little bit of a breakdown on how we've allocated the funds and what the total money is for. And then we get into a summary of net school spending in comparison to prior years. So this year's breakout is it's $221.7 million of Chapter 70 aid, which is an increase of $21.8 million, which is the Student Opportunity Act money. And then the other part of our funding, of our net school spending, is the $11.5 million city contribution. And then we move on to a summary of the numbers of students enrolled in the district, which currently is 3,550. The average per pupil, 15,562 is the average spend per pupil. And then we get into a comparison of charter tuition, charter reimbursement, and school choice. For FY21, the projection is a school choice amount of about $400,000, a charter tuition amount of about $31 million, and a reimbursement of about $5.9 million. This next section goes into the adult education and transportation amounts, which are also part of our budget, and we will get into that also a little bit later on. And then this next chart gives you a comparison year to year of our appropriation request, noting that last year there was an additional request made above net school spending. This year that will not happen. We are just requesting the $216 million. Then this next chart gives you a comparison of reoccurring grants along with one-time grants, which we'll get into in a little bit further detail below in the budget book. So here you will see that this year we are expecting, in FY21, we are expecting approximately $13.9 million of reoccurring federal grants, which is mainly comprised of our title grants. And then we are expecting in FY21 $1.5 million in one-time grants. So this total brings us to our general fund amount of $216 million, which you see is an increase of $22 million over last year, which is mostly all Student Opportunity Act funding. And then the grants for FY21 are expected to be about $15.4 million, which is approximately a $693,000 decrease from last year. This gives you the all funds budget, which includes local and grant funding for this year, which totals to be $217 million, which is approximately a $9.3 million increase over last year. These next two charts show you our enrollment trends for the last several years. And then we start to get into all of our school and Lawrence and our district-wide profile. So I will just kind of give you an overview. This is our district-wide budget. So this budget here is what includes both grant and local. So you see the dollar amount is total $217 million. And there's about a $6.7 million increase over last year with the compensation accounts, and approximately $9.3 million increase from last year on all our other non-salary expenses. There is an increase in staffing here shown. That is mainly due to positions that were added last year after the budget was approved by all of you, because we did request additional funding that was allocated to us, and that was used to add 24 new positions. And that's what that is for. We did not add any new positions from last year to this year. It's just that those positions were added after the budget book was created, and that's why they're there. And now at this point, I will open it up for questions on the budget book specifically before I get into any questions from the subcommittee.
Jessica Anders?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Noemi Custodia Laura?
No questions at this point.
Patricia Mariano?
All set, thank you.
Mayor Rivera?
I'm all set.
Ventura Rodriguez?
I'm all set, thanks.
Julia Silverio? Julia, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm all set, thanks.
Great. Joseph Trinidad, questions on the budget?
All set. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna, Chair is gonna call for a brief recess. I just want to go do a quick research piece on procedure here. Thank you. We're in recess right now. All right, we're back in session. And I think, so at this point, I want to just, Maciel, I want to thank you. I want to remind everyone again that we began this process with a LAE meeting, 2 subcommittee hearings, tonight's meeting. In addition to that, we had gotten a budget and finance update earlier in the year as well. And so at this point, I think where we are here is I will schedule a vote on the budget for next week. And we'll poll members offline on availability. I want to make sure every member is available to vote when we do it, but we will look to vote next week as a final step here on the budget. So I do want to just give and obviously when we vote, we'll reintroduce discussion. People have a chance to ask final questions, but the intent will be to vote that night. So I do just want to give a last call here for anybody who has questions or comments or anything for LPS, but we'll just note that the subcommittee, which constitutes 5 of the 7 members here, have gone through a very thorough process, and the other 2 members have, reviewed the budget in the run up to tonight. So last call for any questions there.
John?
Yep. Pat?
Yeah, I just have one quick question. I know I've looked through this 1,000 times. When we vote on the budget, are we voting on this one or the levels, the budget with the cuts that we might have to take?
So we won't have the SOA number in it. We know that. And I think between now and the time that we have our final vote, we will determine that question, and it will be presented to you with clarity on that.
All right, thank you.
I can just add that the proposal that we have right now is for us to vote on the current budget as presented. And as Maciel had mentioned earlier, we are prepared to do the exercise of cuts once we know what the number is. We believe that this has to be a collaborative process in order to be successful, in order to mitigate this pain. It'll be painful. And so we ask that you, when we come back for a vote, that you vote on the current budget with the understanding that we will come back to you with any cuts necessary.
And just from my perspective on the number, I feel it's make sure that we can, I think that what we would support what the superintendent just said. The issue that I feel is the only wavering issue is the money for SOA. And so I think that if you vote on this budget with the expectation, knowing that the budget is 2 budgets, the budget of running the system the way we have it now, and plus the SOA money, that we could support that because we may get the SOA money, and you don't want to have that not voted on.
The only change we should see on that presentation is the $5 million change that Maciel said it's included in this budget, correct?
That is correct. So the one change that I would have to make is, so as you guys might all recall, when our last presentation for the Student Opportunity Act, we are allowed $5 million of the $21 million to be used for contractual obligations. That is already embedded in the current budget book that you have right now. So that would be the number I would have to, that's the number that Cynthia is referring to in terms of different scenarios, that if you vote on this, we will have to come back to you with scenarios that might look a little bit different once reality does hit. And that would absolutely be one of the scenarios.
And, Mr. Chair, I would just add that, if things get really bad, we may have to come back and do another, like a 1/12 budget, 4 or 5 months into the year. But again, I don't know that that's to be the case. I just want to make sure that folks know that that's a possibility.
Yep. And look, I've been clear on this from the moment we started this process, that we were not voting on the budget at this meeting. Like that was, I've stated that at every step of the way here. What I want to do is schedule the meeting for the vote for next week. And I think pursuant to advice Mayor Rivera has given at, I believe, 3 different junctures along this process, have votes ready that for potentially different scenarios, and recognize that we can come back at later times as well if things change in a good way. But what we don't want to do is vote on a number that we're not certain about. So I'm going to end the discussion here on this tonight, and we are going to keep moving. Superintendent, anything else on your report?
Thank you. We're all set.
Great. Moving to report of the chair, we're going to have CPRL present now on the earned autonomy framework. they've really done a tremendous job to date, and I'm excited for what they're going to present tonight. I will be convening the Earned Autonomy Subcommittee for the first time before the end of the month so that we can do a more detailed review of this as well. But I do just want to sort of reiterate where we've been and where we're going here. CEPRL has presented twice before with updates. This is the first time, though, the actual product, the draft framework dashboard will be presented. I want to make clear to everybody that it is still a process of being revised. It's not final. They did present to the Joint Steering Committee a week ago, which is made up of representatives from Lawrence Teachers Union, Northern Essex Community College, parent, principal, as well as the superintendent and myself. It was met with a positive response overall, or a very positive response overall, and some really good constructive feedback as well. But with that said, I'll actually move this discussion over to Maddie Sims from CEPRL, who has presented to us before, to walk us through everything and update everyone on where we stand with the Earned Autonomy Framework. Maddie?
Thanks so much, John. And thank you all for inviting us to speak with all of you this evening. So I think that Dave is going to help out with sharing our brief PowerPoint presentation. So if you don't mind getting that going, thanks so much. So we are, as John mentioned, excited to share an update tonight on the Earned Autonomy Framework and really walk the board through the school level dashboard that we have been working on in close partnership with both the district and, as John mentioned, the Joint Steering Committee. And just to reiterate what John mentioned a moment ago, we are in the process of continuing to revise the framework and the associated dashboard in response to really valuable feedback that we've been receiving from the district leadership team as well as other members of the committee. So I do want to sort of really just start off by saying thank you to everyone for continued contributions. So turning to slide 2, we have a brief agenda for this evening. Since it's been about a month since we last spoke with the full board, we want to start off by reviewing the theory of action to remind the group what the foundation is for all of this work. And so looking at, we'll then transition to a discussion of the dashboard, and then finally we'll conclude by recapping next steps and opening the floor up to comments or questions. So looking at the slide that you all have now, you'll see that just really a brief recap of why we spend so much time building the theory of action. The purpose of the theory of action is to present the district's goals and proposed actions for achieving them. It's essentially a strategy that articulates both means and ends. What do we want to accomplish and how are we going to get there? As we've previously discussed, a strong theory of action includes measurable actions and outcomes. It shows how these are causally related. It's subject to modification as conditions change and improve. It reflects the community's strengths, challenges, and priorities. And then importantly, communicates the importance of the work being undertaken. So turning to the next slide, slide 5, you'll see this is going to look pretty familiar to all of you from the last meeting. It's very similar, though we've made a couple tweaks based on feedback that we received. And so I want to just really pause on this slide for a moment to remind everyone how our theory of action is structured. So you'll see as on the screen, it communicates that if the leadership, staff, and community at each school collaborate to provide a high quality, and now I'm gonna, the top boxes refer to 1, academic experience, 2, school environment, 3, family and community engagement, and 4, school operations, then all students, including high need students, will achieve the 4 outcomes listed in the bottom box, which are student engagement, student growth, student achievement, and then ultimately be prepared for success. And so this theory of action really does form the foundation of the rest of the work that we're continuing to carry out. So turning to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the development of the dashboard content. So moving to slide 7. The reason I spent the first couple minutes revisiting the theory of action, again, is because it really does form the building block of the next step. So following along here on the slide, you can see that once we have the theory of action, we can then build out a framework which will contain, or excuse me, which does contain a comprehensive set of indicators that reveal the degree to which each school is carrying out the actions needed to support students, as well as producing desired student outcomes. Now, these indicators are captured, visualized, and measured in an actual dashboard. And so the dashboard is the Excel document that I believe you all received prior to this meeting. The dashboard is a tool that can then be used to capture scores, and then the district and principals can use it to assess performance, as well as strategically allocate resources based on what the dashboard is showing. So now turning to slide 8, we can go back, perfect, thank you. As previewed before, the dashboard contains 8 domains that are aligned to the theory of action. And now as we built out each of these 8 domains, we sought to address several key priorities, which you see here on the screen. First is the inclusion of both process and outcome indicators, which together show the school and community whether progress is being made before it would be detected via certain outcome indicators such as test scores. Second is the incorporation of community priorities. This you've heard us sort of mention every time we've presented to this board, that we conducted a really robust stakeholder engagement process during the first couple months of our engagement so that we could be sure that the indicators that are included in the framework and the dashboard, those are things such as student growth, teacher and staff needs, a celebration of diversity, equity and inclusion. Those are all the values that we heard from those conversations and that we ensured came through in the dashboard. And then finally, we have feasibility of data collection. Now, it's certainly something that we've been working closely with the LPS leadership team on to ensure that the tools we contemplate using are really the tools we contemplate using build off of existing tools, as well as thinking about how, from a holistic perspective, the district will be able to gather relevant information as well as analyze it and make decisions based off of it. And so before we move to a preview of the dashboard, I just want to pause and see if anyone has any questions at this stage. And again, sort of, I should have mentioned at the start, there'll certainly be time for questions at the end, but if anyone wants to jump in at any point, please feel free. So in the interest of time, I will move forward to slide 9, and I'm going to turn it over to one of my project associates, Grace, who has joined me this evening to dive into the actual dashboard.
Great. Thanks so much, Maddie. Can you give me a thumbs up, Maddie, that you can hear me? Great. So I assume everyone else can as well. Wonderful. So my name's Grace McCarty, as Maddie just said. I am a project associate at CPRL, and just want to give a quick introduction to myself, since many of you I know I have not met, though many of you have had the pleasure of working with. I am a 3L, well, almost graduate of NYU Law School. My last day is actually tomorrow, so I'm moments away from the end. And my focus has been on education, law, and policy during my 3 years at NYU. And I've also been with CPRL now for 2 years. So I'm excited to meet everyone, and I've been so grateful to have the chance to work on this project. So with that, I will, while we're still here on slide 9, just give a little bit of a refresher on the basics as far as the dashboard goes. So each school is, of course, going to have a dashboard, and this dashboard is going to be a document, an Excel sheet, that will show the school's scores on each indicator in our framework. And just as sort of a note at the beginning here, while there are going to be variations between the indicators used for PK to 8 schools and our Lawrence High School academies, indicators that indicators are going to be the same for any group of schools that are sort of in the same grade band. So you'll notice that when we dig into the dashboard a little more. And the idea there is really just to make sure that the district is able to sort of analyze and understand each school's progress in a comparative way, so they can sort of make transparent and fair decisions. So that's just a little bit of background before we dive in. And I think at this point, it'll be great to move right into slide 10. And here's where I sort of start the little bit of orientation to the dashboard, if you will. So here in slide 10, what we're really seeing is a screenshot of the overview tab. So this is a tab, if you did pull up the Excel sheet, for example, you would see this in your overview tab. And this sort of serves a little bit like a table of contents. As Maddie mentioned earlier, we have 8 domains, and each of these domains actually aligns with a piece of the theory of action. And each of these domains is also going to have sort of subcategories. So we've got groups, and then we've got groups within groups. But sort of each of these will also be able to sort of give a school a sense of how they're performing in each of the domains. So this overview will sort of provide that summary. And we can jump forward to slide 11. Okay. Now here in slide 11, we're still working with our overview tab, but this is a screenshot that basically shows what you would see if you were to click on the academic experience. And you see that you sort of get a little bit of a drop-down menu here. And this drop-down menu then showcases those categories, those subgroups that I mentioned before. And as you can see in the column that's sort of toward the right, where it says scores 0 to 4, there are these sort of empty boxes. Now, depending on how a school is doing in a given domain and then also in a given category, they'll have a score for each of those elements. So when this dashboard is actually populated for an individual school, it won't look quite like this. You'll see a bunch of little black boxes in there that show you sort of what the score is for each domain and each category. And while we're sort of talking about scores, I think it will be helpful to just give a little bit of a reminder of what these scores really mean. I know we've talked about this a bit with some of the folks who are here on this call, but I know for myself, at least, I often need a little bit of a refresher, so I think it'll be helpful for the group. So why don't we jump right to slide 12. Great. So here you'll see the dashboard key. And as I had mentioned before, when these dashboards get populated, they're going to represent the scores, basically showing how are schools doing in each of these domains, in each of these categories. So here you can see what each of the scores really means. A score of 4, which you'll see right up at the top with the 4 black boxes, indicates that a school has exceeded their target. A score of 3 indicates that a school has met their target. A score of 2 indicates that a school has improved on a measure, but is still below target. And a score of 1 indicates that there's been no meaningful change and the school is still below target. Last but not least, we have a score of 0, which would indicate that a school has actually declined in performance. So it's kind of important to note here that the way this dashboard is ultimately going to generate scores is not simply by saying, okay, here's the raw score, the raw piece of data for a given indicator, but we're actually using targets, and then the scores are generated based on whether or not schools are meeting those targets. So I'm going to take a quick pause there because I know it's already a lot of information and we're only getting started. So I want to give people a chance to ask any questions, or if there's anything you'd like us to clarify, we're happy to do that.
Are you going in order, John, or do we just shout them out?
No, I'll go in order. Joseph Trinidad, any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, Julio Silverio, any questions?
No, I'm all set, thanks.
All right, Ventura Rodriguez, any questions?
I'm good for now.
Mayor Rivera, any questions?
All set, thanks.
Patricia Mariano, any questions?
All set.
Noemi Custodia Laura, any questions?
All set right now.
Jess Sanders, questions?
I do just have a couple. So is the school themselves going to identify what the target is and like create a baseline is my first question. And then my second question is like, who's measuring or evaluating the school against that baseline? Is it a self-evaluation process or is it some more outside?
Sure. And I'm happy to answer both of those. They're both great questions. So on the target setting question, that's actually a conversation that we are in the process of having with the district leadership team, as well as other representatives on the steering committee who are representative of the principals as well, because we definitely want to ensure that the target setting process is one that balances a lot of different priorities, including feasibility, fairness, as well as incorporating both district and principal voice. So I think the short answer to that is that the target setting process has not been finalized, but we are in the process of having really great discussions with both the leadership team and principal representatives to come up with a process that will make the most sense for all the schools. And it's definitely something that we are thinking long and hard about, because there are sort of a couple different ways it could look, and we want to make sure that we are arriving at a solution that balances the priorities in the most effective way. And then the second question about how the data will be collected, we'll definitely get to a little bit more detail about that later in the presentation, but we have sort of 4 different main tools. Some of the data will be coming from data that's already collected at the state level by DESE. Some of the data will be coming from district level administrative records, and then a lot of the data will be coming actually from a combination of surveys as well as an in-school quality review process, and that would be a basically in-school live review conducted by a third-party expert. And so the idea is definitely not that schools would be self-reporting really any of the data, and the idea would be that the collection process would be normed and ensuring fairness across schools.
Maddie, can you specify the surveys for everyone?
Sure. So right now, the surveys that we're contemplating include a student survey, a parent and community member survey, as well as a teacher and staff survey. And in the case of the parent and community survey, we are certainly not starting from scratch there. In that case, we are building upon the existing Family Resource Center survey, which has a ton of really strong info. And so in that case, we're just adding some questions to make sure that all of the information needed for the framework can be captured.
All right, good. The other piece I would mention, Jess, is I think there's the first year coming up would be the year to set the baselines.
Yeah, thank you, John, for mentioning that. And I should have included that in my answer as well, that we, in our discussions with the district, I think everyone is definitely aligned that we would want to complete a year of data collection to ensure that the targets that are being set can be really built upon the prior year's data, so that we can ensure that they are able to strike the right balance of both ambitious so that they motivate growth, but also realistic and attainable so that we're not kind of shooting ourselves too high either. So thank you, John, for mentioning that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question or concern, but I'll save it for later in the process. Let's go on. Thank you.
Great. If Grace wants to keep moving us, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for those questions. Super helpful. And hopefully we'll be able to answer a couple of them as we continue through the presentation even more clearly, so you'll get a sense. Let's jump to slide 13. So at this point, I want to walk through some of the categories that you're going to find on your dashboard. So as we said before, the domains are then broken down into subcategories. So I'm just going to walk through these to give everyone a sense, and then we can ask questions a little bit later on. So starting first in the top left, our first domain is the academic experience domain. And the idea behind this domain is that we really want to measure the actions that a school is taking to deliver a rigorous, culturally responsive curriculum and high quality instruction. And we also want to measure whether or not schools are sort of addressing the needs of diverse learners. So as you can see below, some of the categories that we have included here are curriculum and academic materials, assessment and monitoring, academic support for all students, preparation for college and career readiness, professional development and collaboration. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of what these will actually look like at the indicator level, for example, in curriculum and academic materials, an example of an indicator would be the extent to which the curriculum is aligned across grades, and we'd be measuring whether or not that's going on at the school level. Another example for academic support for all students. So an example there would be the percentage of staff who report, and again, this would be in a survey as we'll discuss a little bit more later on, the percentage of staff who report that English language learners are receiving the appropriate services that they need based on their proficiency level. So that kind of gives you a sense of how we sort of move from the domain level down to the category level, and then at the most granular at the indicator level. And the same thing will happen across each of these domains. So rolling right along to the bottom left corner, we have, oh, sorry, not the next slide yet. Perfect, thank you. Rolling right along to the bottom left corner, we have the school environment domain. And this measures the school's actions to build an inclusive environment that supports all students' socio-emotional needs and that makes all school community members really feel welcomed, valued, and safe. So you can see that our categories here really align with those ideas. We've got safety, we've got climate, socio-emotional support, and teacher and staff satisfaction. And again, to sort of take you down to that granular indicator level, an example for the safety category would be the percentage of students who report feeling safe in the school building. To take you again to the granular indicator level, in the climate category, one example of an indicator would be the percentage of students who report having at least one adult in the school building who they trust and feel they can reach out to for support. So that's what it's really going to sort of look like as we get down to the indicator level. Popping over to the top right corner, we have family and community engagement. And this domain is designed to measure the school's actions to provide community engagement and family partnership opportunities that are really effective, inclusive, and tailored to Lawrence's diverse needs. So you can see our categories here. We have family and community support, bicultural commitment and cultural responsiveness, accessible communication, and events. And again, to share a couple indicators just to give you a sense of what this will look like in the dashboard. For family and community support, one indicator is the extent to which schools disseminate resources that allow parents to assist with student learning at home, something that we have already covered on this call and is so super important right now. Another example of an indicator in the bicultural commitment and cultural responsiveness category is parents who report that all the communications they get from school are in both English and Spanish. So really measuring whether or not our families are having access to this information that they need. Our last action domain is school operations in the bottom right. So that is designed to measure a school's actions to plan, execute, and improve school level operations in an efficient, transparent, equitable, and sustainable manner. So here we've got a couple categories as well: budget and school planning, staffing, and then high expectations and continuous improvement. And once again, to offer a couple indicator examples, for budget and school planning, we'll be measuring the percentage of annual expenditures that are allocated to educational expenses. For staffing, an example would be staff to student ratios. So in the interest of continuing to move forward, let's go right on to slide 14, and I'll cover the next set of domains. Great. So what you have on the screen now are our 4 outcome domains. And just like I did for the action domains, I'm going to walk through them and give you a couple examples so you can get a sense of what these are really going to look like in practice. So first, we've got student engagement. So this domain measures outcomes that show how effectively students are engaging in their school communities and sort of investing in their own personal academic success. So our categories here are classroom engagement, sort of how students are doing in the classroom, leadership and enrichment activity participation. Enrichment activity is also sometimes called extracurriculars, and then interest in college or careers. So some examples of indicators here for classroom engagement: we might want to measure the quality of students' thinking, their participation, and their ownership of academic work. And for leadership and enrichment activity participation, we might measure the percentage of students who participate in school leadership roles. So that's student engagement. Moving right along to the student growth domain. The student growth domain is designed to measure the gains students are making each year in key academic subject areas, as well as English language proficiency. So this domain is going to use data reported by DESI together with local growth. So that's important to note here. It's a little bit different from the other domains in that regard. So our categories here are ELA growth, math growth, science growth, and English language proficiency. And I'm not going to dive too deeply into the indicators there because some of them will be coming from DESI. And with that, I'll move right over to the student achievement domain. So very closely related to student growth, the student achievement domain is designed to measure whether students are reaching key academic performance milestones. So this is kind of, that what we often see in almost every framework that's out there for measuring student performance. And this will include, just like the student growth domain, it's going to have data from DESI as well as some local data. And here we've got ELA performance, math performance, and science performance. And our last domain is our prepared for success domain. And this domain measures outcomes that show how well students are building 21st century skills that are needed to graduate and to be prepared also for college or career, whatever the student's path is following high school. So our categories here, we've got high school readiness, high school completion, advanced course participation, and college or career readiness. So another sort of example of some of the indicators that you might see in this domain. For high school readiness, for example, we're going to be measuring third grade MCAS ELA success because, research shows that if students are reading and they're successful with that in third grade, then they're on track for high school. Another example, in the college and or career readiness category, we're going to be measuring the percentage of students who graduate and earn a post-secondary degree, or students who remain enrolled, or have a career placement for at least a full year. So again, it's a lot of information. Maddie, if it's okay with you, I think we should pause there to just take any questions that have come up so far about the structure or the content and what we've shared on the dashboard so far.
Yeah, sure. John, I'll maybe just check with you if you'd like to pause here or if you'd like us to keep moving. We're happy to do whichever you prefer.
I'll take a quick run through to see if anyone has questions. Thanks. Okay. Jess, questions right now?
No, not right now on this part.
Okay. Noemi, questions?
No questions at this point.
Pat Mariano, questions?
Not at this time.
Mayor Rivera?
I'm all set.
Ventura Rodriguez?
None right now, thanks.
Julia Severio? I think you're on mute, Julia.
All set for now, thanks.
Great. Joseph Trinidad?
All set, thank you.
All right, great. Keep going.
Great, thanks. So now we get to jump in finally to the dashboard itself. So I feel like I've been previewing, and now we can finally take a look at what this is actually going to look like when you open up a tab on the dashboard. So we're going to zoom in here on a domain example, and this is the prepared for success domain. So here I'm just going to sort of walk you through what you see on the screen, and hopefully this will help some of what might have seemed a bit abstract sort of come down to earth when we really see it here in practice. So I'm going to start by sort of talking a little bit about the leftmost column. So, whoops, let me jump back to slide 15. The leftmost column has our outcomes. And the outcomes, of course, are the student outcomes that we are really trying to achieve. In the next column over, you'll see the indicators. So I shared out a few examples of indicators. This is what they're actually going to look like when they're sort of here in the dashboard. So those indicators are giving us basically the information that shows us how we know whether or not the outcome has happened. So if you look at that first outcome, third grade MCAS ELA success, the indicator there is the percentage of third grade students meeting or exceeding expectations on the MCAS ELA exam. So maybe that's, super clear, but for me, sometimes it helps to just say, okay, that's where the relationship is. So that's the relationship between our outcomes and our indicators. Next column over, and we touched on this a bit in our first round of questions, In our next column over, we've got the data collection tools. And as Maddie pointed out, right now we are contemplating the use of 4 different data collection tools, and I'll just restate them here as a refresher. We've got DESI administrative records, LPS administrative records, surveys, including surveys for students, teachers, and staff, as well as parents and guardians, and then last, quality review. In the next column over, you'll see the school type. So as I mentioned back at the beginning of this presentation, not all indicators are going to be used for all schools. So if a school only serves grades PK to 8, for example, they will not be measuring the high school graduation rate. So some of the indicators are going to apply only to the high school academies, whereas others will apply only to grades PK to 8. And then there will also be some that are used for all schools. And then if you look in our last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, these are all sort of space for where we're going to be recording the actual numbers. So the data is going to get plugged in. We're going to be looking at the prior value of a school's performance on a given indicator, their current value, their current target, their prior score, and their current score. And this is really going to allow us to do a lot of comparison, to get a sense of growth and to get a sense of where schools are really excelling and where schools may need a little bit more support. One final note before I pass it back over to Maddie and before we take a few more questions. When you open your own dashboard in Excel, you'll also see in each domain tab, you'll also have an overall domain score. So that's actually missing from this screenshot here, but I just wanted to flag that all of this information, that all of these current scores for each indicator do get aggregated into a single domain score, a prepared for success score. And that will also be available in each domain tab. So with that, I will turn it back over to the group for any questions, reactions, and then Maddie will talk us through next steps.
Great. Thank you, Grace. And so maybe in the interest of time, I'll sort of keep going to the next. We have just a couple, 1 or 2 more slides, and then we'll open it up to the full group for questions. So turning to slide 17, if we want to flip one more slide, we sort of have an overview of next steps. So just as to mention one more time, I know that you all received the full dashboard. We are continuing to revise this dashboard based on input from the district, from the Joint Steering Committee members, which again, as John noted, represents a really broad cross-section of Lawrence stakeholders, as well as input from our DESI contacts as well. Another item that's going to be taking place over the next several weeks is continuing to collaborate with both the district and the principals in response to the question earlier, in order to align on a target setting process that makes sense for all schools. Once sort of those loose ends have been tied up and we've updated the dashboard based on the feedback, we are going to be preparing a manual that will include sort of a couple components. It will include the updated dashboard. It will include detailed methodologies, or often referred to as business rules, for every single indicator in the dashboard. It will include copies of certain data collection tools. So for example, it will include a full student survey, a full teacher and staff survey, and then we'll also be including recommendations for the design of a public-facing snapshot. And I think one thing that I believe we've mentioned briefly, but that we should really emphasize, is that this dashboard that we've been talking about, which is the Excel sheet, is intended for use by the district, as well as principals and other perhaps members of the teacher leadership team and staff. This is not intended at all to be shared with the public due to the number of indicators. And so we are going to, in our final manual, prepare some design recommendations for the type of information that the district might want to consider publishing on its website if it decides to do that in future years. Finally, we're going to be meeting again with the full Joint Steering Committee on June 3rd to present them with the updated dashboard and continue to receive feedback from that broad group of stakeholders. And then finally, on June 10th, next time we meet with all of you, we'll be presenting the updated dashboard and manual for approval. And I don't want to call it the final dashboard, because we definitely don't kind of view it as a tool that will be final at the end of our engagement. Rather, as with a lot of other tools the district is using, and as we've sort of discussed with both the district and principals, the idea is that the district will be continuously refining this over the years as it begins to collect information, collect data, and sort of understand how it can be most useful to all relevant folks. And so with that, I definitely want to open it up to questions, reactions, and let us know what additional information we can provide that would be helpful.
Great. Maddie, Grace, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. I just want to add one piece there. Between the 3rd and the 10th, we will also convene the Earned Autonomy Subcommittee, and I will extend an invitation to all LAE members to attend that as well, to dig in on questions and comments that they wish to offer beyond tonight, to get a second opportunity to do that prior to then coming before the full board at the June meeting. Last piece I just want to mention in here is that the surveys are a crucial part here of gathering information, which will be used in this. And I think it can't be stated enough, because the idea here is that we've done all this extensive work in reaching out and talking to all these different stakeholders across Lawrence, all of whom I think are represented in some way, shape, or form on the Joint Steering Committee as well, which we've been in constant touch with, including families, but that there is, what features that will be regular parts of this include a family survey, a student survey, and a teacher survey. And I just want to, for me personally, like, I can't emphasize that part enough, because the test score stuff is there as required by the state and built into this, and it should align with what we know we have to do for the state, but it is these other pieces, particularly the subjective pieces, I think that can really paint a fuller picture of how our schools are doing in meeting the needs and priorities that the community has identified as their needs and priorities. So that said, I will open it up to questions and feedback. Joseph Trinidad, any questions or comments?
No, sir.
Okay, thanks, Joseph. Julia Silverio?
Yeah, I'm on, okay. John, I really want to thank Grace. I love and Maddie, I love the enthusiasm that Grace had brought to us and making this presentation. I think it's a great tool that will finally a true measuring tool to evaluate how well our schools are doing, and that will perhaps assist us in the future to help those that show signs of failure at any given point, and hopefully it will help the schools, the students, and the administrators to help them to get to the next level. So I think this is good, and I'm happy to hear the tools that they have put in place.
Thank you, Julia. Ventura Rodriguez?
Again, I get to follow her, so I get to echo all her sentiments, which I think are great. And I think, John, I appreciate the invitation to the next meeting, because I would love to, I think at that meeting, better understand things like, sort of timing of when information is available and when dashboards would be considered, that we have all information to release a dashboard. Some of these things seem to be lagging indicators, which, is just the way they are. But if the superintendent and the schools are trying to make decisions based on the information, I just love to get a better handle, and again, I can wait on that, on things like that. And then, similarly, I think this is great. I think that it's great that, the purpose is primarily for information to be able to make decisions on how to support schools, and how schools can react and use the information to improve their communities. And then I think, a next step for us with the district and as a board is just thinking about, what this information means for our direct, support to schools and districts in different areas or domains rather than that, are captured here. So love it. I'm glad that we get to react to something that's so concrete. But again, those are sort of the types of questions that I'd love to dig into further with the, attending the subcommittee. So thank you.
John, if I may interject, I know you're going to the next person, but my congratulations to Grace on her upcoming graduation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, me too. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks, Julia. Mayor Rivera, questions or comments?
And I might have just missed it, but my concern is that we get all this great data and we're making decisions off of it, but it seemed like there's a level of it that we're concerned might get into the public. And I actually sent Maddie a question in the chat. Isn't all of this public data anyway?
Sure, I'm happy.
And can't we, I understand the tendency to want to make those hierarchical decisions without harming others in the hierarchy. And I think we need to show winners and losers. And I know that not everybody thinks that way. But this is one of those things where it's, we have a very big budget for this department, and I think you have to show it for also, show the diamonds and the warts.
Yes.
Sure.
Maddie, let me just jump in there, and then I want you to go. So, Mayor, it's honestly excellent question, and one of the first places I went when we started on this. I think just to be clear on this, every school, you take all those little factors, the 8 big factors, all the sub pieces underneath it that are getting a rating to get to the point that gives it all a rating. I think some of that, no doubt, is publicly available and should be easily accessible. Some of it is new that will just be specific to this framework that Lawrence has developed. The idea is that it leads to a cumulative rating, a final grade on how that school's done that year. That part would be publicly available, potentially based on decisions that are made as we go forward into the future by LPS, the Joint Steering Committee, this board. Other pieces potentially could be, but the idea is that only the sort of one big rating would be made public. The rest of it is data for LPS to then determine strategies about where to provide help when help is needed. And then the other piece on this is just to remember that this all ties into earned autonomy and open architecture. The idea here is, and this will be developed over the next year as we get a baseline, but is depending on your grade, it will equal the level of autonomy you maintain and freedom within open architecture. And if you are struggling, then that would result in some of those autonomies being reined in so that the district can direct more interventions.
Yeah, I'll add to that exactly what John is saying. The intention here is to use this tool for differentiated supports with clear understanding from the school leaders and the staff and parents as to where those additional supports are needed. So I think it helps us to then come to you all, to Ventura's point earlier, to say, look, here are additional resources that we're going to be asking maybe in the upcoming budget, maybe at that moment, to support schools. And we have measures and metrics, indicators to say against this other school or as measured by, and with confidence make those decisions.
No, I'm sorry. I think you guys, I think you all are answering questions that I didn't ask. I totally understand that.
Sure.
I totally understand that. My issue is, I think, and again, as we think about the progress the district has made, We take these dashboards. I think it's great information. Why wouldn't we use it as part of the decision-making process? I want to know, is this being really, not to second guess the decision of the superintendent, but, if we go 4 years and the same school, the number for that one school doesn't change, and it's nice, it's good enough for us to not deal with it. But the ELL number is awful, and year after year, without us knowing it, because we only know the big number, it's enough for us to want to see decisions made on that at the lower level. And I think that those things are they're public information. And so I worry about the shielding part, but I also worry about there is actually a law that says you got to show it.
Sure. And maybe I can answer sort of one part of the question and then certainly welcome others to jump in. I think that when I originally said that certain of this information would not be shared publicly, it was by no stretch of the imagination intended as a shielding exercise. It was just more about form in which information would be shared. And what I mean by that is the current dashboard is an Excel sheet, and the number of indicators has been reduced, but right now I think we have in our current draft, about 90 indicators, maybe 60 or 70, depending on what type of school it is. And I think in looking at how other districts have chosen, New York City being one example, have chosen to share some of this information with the public, the goal is always to make sure that it's in an accessible format. So if you put yourself in the position of a parent, the idea of opening up an Excel document with multiple tabs on it might, for some parents, not be necessarily the most accessible format. And instead, you might want to choose a different format where you're still able to share some of that same granular information, but it might be in what I've heard called a snapshot, for example, which is a different type of presentation. There might be graphs, because a lot of focus groups in other communities have showed that parents are more willing to engage with the information when it's presented in a visual manner. And so I think that's all to say that we are going to be providing some recommendations as to how the district could think about sharing this information. And it's not necessarily been decided yet sort of how much or exactly how granular, but I definitely do hear you and your point about the value of sharing perhaps some more granular information, and that will certainly be a decision that the district will be working through going forward. So definitely appreciate that comment. And I think I was more focused on presentation, so like the Excel document format versus perhaps something more visual rather than the actual information.
Yep. Thanks, Maddie. And Mayor, I misunderstood your question. Apologies on that front. What I was just trying to drive at is this just notion of putting something out there that's easy to understand, but certainly everybody has a right to see all the information. And quite frankly, it's up to this board working with the district to decide the level of information we want to put out in the first instance. All of it is accessible either, through existing means or the public's right to ask for it. I just am focused on presenting it in a way that's meaningful for families, but totally ultimately up to this board about the shape it takes. And I take your point. Great. Patricia Mariano?
Yeah, I want to thank Maddie and Grace for a very comprehensive presentation. And I can foresee this being a great help to supporting the schools at each level, wherever they are, and ultimately supporting our students and offering the best possible education for them. So I want to thank you for this, and I look forward to future meetings and, to delve a little bit more deeply into the spreadsheets and the indicators. Grace, I want to wish you well. If you notice my background, you can join in on celebrating the high school kids. We'll include you in my background. So congratulations on your graduation. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
You're muted, John.
Thanks, Pat. Noemi Custodia-Laura?
The only question that I have, and actually before that, I want to echo what everybody has been saying. This is tremendous work. And I really feel that it's going to help, as we make decisions about the schools. One of the questions that I had, I think it was answered already by Cynthia, which was about how this information will be used on the open architecture. But then the other piece with that is that understanding that even right now, if you do a snapshot of each of the schools, they're all at different levels. How are you going to normalize that and show progress? Because if you have a school that is already, just to made it up, at a level 5 of something, and the other one is a level 2, you cannot base the baseline at level 5 because the school that is a level 2 is already in disadvantage. So how are you going to normalize that, and who make the decisions on what would be the reasonable baseline?
So let me just take a quick stab at that and then give Maddie and Grace a shot, and if the superintendent wants to chime in. But one of the reasons I want to take a stab at it is I've been asking this question since the beginning just to understand it. But we put this tool, like hypothetically, assume we finalize it, approve the vote. We put this tool into practice for the coming school year. We're not going to give ratings at the end of the coming school year because it's going to be used to establish the baseline that you're talking about, Noemi. So we're not going to start at level 5 or level 2. We're going to take the dashboard, use it for 1 year. That will set the baseline for all of the schools. And then in the second year would be the first time that you would get actual ratings. Maddie, anything on that?
Yeah, that's completely right. And I think the only thing that I'll add is we've also been thinking a lot about this question and thinking about what, if any, indicators need to have different targets for different schools. And I'm not sure if this is exactly where you were going, but hopefully it's at least partially responsive. One of the things is that when it comes to certain of the outcome data, particularly that from DESE, the targets are already based on, they're sort of normed for prior performance. So DESE's process by which it assigns different ratings for different MCAS scores, for example, is already taking into account past performance. On the other hand, when you think about some of the indicators that are sort of more on the action side, so an example that comes to mind is percentage of students who feel safe. In that case, the district might make the determination in consultation with principals and teachers that that number needs to have the same target across schools regardless of test scores. So just because a certain school has been performing perhaps lower on test scores, perhaps because of the student population, there still might be certain instances where regardless of that fact, there does need to be a standard baseline across. So those are all decisions that are really great questions and decisions that everyone will be working through once there's a year of data collected and they're able to use that as a reference point. So appreciate that question.
Noemi, does that answer the question or?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jess Anders.
So I guess the question I have is, like, one reason I think that this is great is because I have felt for a long time that we need a way other than MCAS scores to be measuring like our schools and our students' progress and so on. And so I guess I have like a several layered question, which is around some of the things I'm wondering are, does the fact that we're defining, these sort of indicators and benchmarks of success and these priorities for ourselves, like, does that hold weight with DESE too? Like, what I want to know is not that DESE is willing to accept this framework from us, and they're not just going to look at the MCAS scores and take that piece of it and judge us on that, but that they're willing to say, yes, the way that you guys want to evaluate yourselves is also the way that we're going to evaluate you and your success, right? So that's one question I have. And then the second question I have is sort of more around operationalizing this. It's almost like in future years, and I don't think we can do it necessarily with the budget this year, but I'd almost like to see a budget document next year that kind of lines up our budget investments against these categories, because a budget is supposed to be an expression of our values, right? We're saying these are our values. This is our theory of change and of action. So we need to put our money where our mouth is. And I want to see that reflected in the budget. There's just as much investment in school environment and family and community engagement, because that's an equal priority, you know, along with the other things that we're investing in, right? So I would encourage us to think about organizing and looking at the budget in that way, and also looking at teacher evaluation in that way too, right? Because a teacher, I mean, one of the, you know, things that we often hear is, you know, teachers do say, I would love to do more family and community engagement, but I don't have room on my plate for it, and I'm not really deeply evaluated on that, right? I'm really held to, did the M-class scores in my classroom go up or improve? So I'd like to see this permeate like the money and the evaluation part of this, as well as, you know, our sort of stated expression of values.
So I agree with everything you said. I don't know if we should put Ventura on the spot or ask for Maddie to offer her thoughts, or the superintendent.
Put Ventura on the spot.
Okay, Ventura. We designed this very clearly. Like you know, I talked to folks in multiple districts around the country who had done something like this, and we ultimately found CPRL, and the number one thing everybody said to us was it needs to align with your state's existing frameworks on judging schools, and that is in place here. But we've got all these other pieces added where we think the state doesn't go far enough. But to Jess's point, I don't know the answer. Ventura, I think we'd love for you to comment on it, since you know, you're all knowing.
Yeah, that's not true. Ask my kids. I mean, look, all I would say is that, I mean, I really like this tool. I think this is, to Jess's point, trying to meet a local need, which is, you know, trying to think about the measures that, you know, at the department we currently track, and then others, like, you know, again, this survey data, quite frankly, are ways of assessing and getting information from different stakeholders that, you know, as a state, we don't do. So I would just say, you know, again, like, this is in line in terms of obviously the data collection around assessment and growth that are already built into this, but, you know, this is a tool for local decision making, is sort of how I see it, which is completely aligned with state data. But I mean, you know, if the question is, will the department, you know, or within sort of law, make decisions around a district like Lawrence based on this? I mean, it's just not what this tool is set up to do, and it's not what, you know, we have a state accountability system that, again, includes components that are in this local model, but I just think this local model is set up to answer questions and do things that are different from what our statewide accountability system is meant to do. So, you know, that's my reaction right now. Again, as a board member here, I agree with Jess that I like that this is giving us, through the surveys, I think some of that voice that, you know, I think is really important for us to know and be able to make decisions around. And just to echo Jess's point, I actually think that, you know, this notion of having this information, as I was talking about earlier, in terms of timing, like in a timeline that allows us to act on it and, you know, make decisions around budget and things like that, is just going to be really, really critical.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the one quick note I will just add in response to the question is, the way that the theory of action is structured is such that all of the indicators are there because CPRL deeply believes that these are the conditions that schools need to execute in order to improve student performance, in order to see student growth, see student engagement, ultimately prepare students for success. So that's all to say that in the event that schools are able to show progress on a lot of the indicators that we talked about sort of during the first half of our presentation, the research and best practices shows that those combination of indicators will ultimately result on the other needle moving, which is the needle that DESE is working with, which is on the MCAS score. So I think that's another level of coherence in that we're not measuring indicators that are separate, we're rather measuring indicators that ultimately will lead to improvement on DESE's measures. But definitely a great question.
Okay. The other piece here is just what this earned autonomy framework embodies should be reflected in the turnaround plan. And then the budget should align as well, Jess, I think is a great point. But we should at bare minimum have alignment between the turnaround plan that we will take up in the fall and the earned autonomy framework, which hopefully can have some bearing on how the state looks at us beyond their established framework. I don't know, Jess, do you have follow-up comments or questions? I think you nail it in sort of like where we hope that this can go. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm like pressing the wrong buttons. Yeah, no, I'm glad for this because I feel like it gives us a framework and a foundation to invest in all of those indirect things that I think will eventually bring up the MCAS scores and maybe take some of the like overt and immediate emphasis off, like just test prep, this, that, you know, like we have to make these other investments if we want to see the real long-term gain in the scores. So hopefully this gives us both the foundation and the room to do that, because the other thing about that is I feel like, you know, we might not see immediate results from that. Like all of those other things are strategies that you have to invest in over time in order to get some momentum on, and then you'll see the gains in the critical thinking and the self-confidence and the test taking and the test performance. So I just want to make sure that we have the room and the time to invest in those things. That's all. And I am going to have to sign off in a minute because I really have to feed my child. So.
Understood. Thanks, Jess. All right, thank you. Maddie and Grace, huge thanks for this update and all your hard work. And I echo the sentiments of all my colleagues, both in thanking you for the hard work and wishing Grace the best as she graduates tomorrow. And Grace, I once graduated from law school, and the advice I would give you is if you can find a way not to practice law, you'll be doing really well. But that's all
John, I'll echo that sentiment. And really do want to thank everyone on this call for really all of your input, as well as sort of those who aren't here. Definitely, it's been a lot of folks who have contributed to the framework and the dashboard, and we're excited to sort of keep working with all of you over the coming weeks.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you. All right. So on Student Opportunity Act update, we've got none at this time. And I think we'll add SOA onto the agenda next week when we move on to the budget vote, so that I can give any pertinent updates if they are at this time. And I sort of look at the June meeting as the time at which we've got to make a decision about whether to vote and send that application in. Then I just based on my conversations with DESE, we're not going to be penalizing ourselves if we wait till that point. At the same time, we, like every district in the state, is just in a holding pattern with where everything is fiscally given COVID. So no SOA update tonight beyond what I just said. We'll add it for next week. The other piece I will just reiterate is then between June 3rd and June 10th, Earned Autonomy Subcommittee, we will have this meeting to see where the framework is then, because it will have undergone further revisions. And in that meeting, we'll go through like everything factor by factor and get a chance for everybody to give last comments before it comes before the board on June 10th. So I want to approve the minutes and then give the members chance for any news updates, final comments, and the superintendent a chance to close the meeting. But at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the April 8th, 2020 LAE board meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Approval of the minutes has been moved by member Mariano, seconded by member Rodriguez. All those in favor say aye. If you can release your mutes.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are adopted. At this time, are there any closing comments or statements or news or information any members wish to offer?
I'm all set, thanks.
Great. Superintendent, do you have any closing? Oh, sorry, Jess, did you have something?
I just want to add something. This is not necessarily on topic, but since we have a little bit of an audience, just to let you know that a bunch of the nonprofits in the city and the mayor and so on are going to be launching a website called One Lawrence that's about raising funds for cash assistance to families who've been impacted by the by COVID, which I mean is everybody, but with a particular focus on helping families that don't have access to anything else. And I'm sorry to use this forum for fundraising, but we'll be sending out the link to everybody that we know. And I would really encourage and hope that people can donate to that, because 100% of the funds will be directly funneled to families via gift cards and help with paying rent and getting food and paying bills. So we all know that our community is very much suffering right now. And so everything that we can all do to pitch in would be really fabulous. So once that goes live, we'll be sending out notification about that.
Thanks, Jess. I'll just go down the order if anybody. Noemi, anything for closing?
No, not at this point. Thank you.
Great. Pat, anything?
No, thank you.
All right. I know the mayor had the hop. Ventura, anything?
The only thing I'll say is just, sorry, back to this, the earned autonomy framework. I just want to underscore how, from my point of view, I mean, this is a pretty sophisticated way for district, when I think of like the districts in the Commonwealth, what we're proposing here is a pretty sophisticated way for a district to really, I think it's just as saying, go beyond what state accountability requires and really seek to understand the needs of its schools and students. And so, I just want to underscore that, because I think we're on the cutting edge here, as a district, and that could only help us just in terms of like long-term sustainability, of a district. Like, just want to underscore how important what that work is and what I think it represents when I think of, districts across the entire Commonwealth. I just want to really, celebrate that work. I know we're not done yet, but it's a pretty remarkable step that we're looking at so many factors to think about the health of our students and our schools.
Thanks, Ventura. Julia, anything in closing?
I'm all set, thanks.
Thanks. Joseph, Trinidad, anything in closing?
The only thing was that I missed. I thought we were in a just pause for the presentation for Earn Autonomy, and I didn't get the chance to thank the Earn Autonomy group for all they have done. And I just think that that's an awesome plan that they have, really thoughtful, and that is really going to bring equality to the system, to our educational system. So thanks to them, and thanks to all of you who are here supporting our students and our communities, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Joseph. Those really appreciate those comments, especially from the student perspective. So thank you so much on that. I just want to thank Dave and Joan and the whole LPS team that allows us to do these remote meetings and is getting all the materials out ahead of time and everything you've been doing. Really appreciate that. And Superintendent, I'll turn it over to you for any closing remarks. I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to thank the leadership team for their excellent work in preparing for tonight's presentation and being so thorough with all of this information, which is critical to the work ahead. And I also appreciate the engagement that you all have given us this evening and throughout this closure, and look forward to finalizing this budget with you and continuing the work that is so needed throughout this closure and as we prepare to reopen later this summer and into the fall. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thanks to your team for all their prep and hard work through this whole time and with tonight's meeting. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion to adjourn is moved by Member Silverio, seconded by Member Rodriguez. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries at this time. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.